Morning, team. Intelligence has nothing to do with consciousness. You could take the most intelligent person on Earth, the smartest person alive, and also take somebody who maybe is not quite so cognitive, which isn't to be insulting. Maybe they're more of a physical type of person. Just somebody who isn't quite so cognitive, not quite so analytical, not quite so critical in their thinking, not quite so logical. It's not a judgment, there's just an infinite number of expressions of beings on this planet. Some are more cognitive than others. We could say some are more intelligent than others. It's fine. And so we take somebody who is highly intelligent and take somebody who perhaps is not so intelligent. And both of those individuals are equally conscious, meaning both of those individuals are equally aware of their own experience, aware of their own being, aware that they exist, aware that they are. So consciousness is the great equalizer. All beings are created equal, as one book puts it, right? And it is consciousness that is the great equalizer. We're all experiencing different things, but the one thing that remains constant and equal is experience itself. Awareness of our own experience. And you can do this experiment right now. Don't worry so much about what you are experiencing, but instead just double checking, am I aware of my own experience? For example, I'm aware of the bird song and the traffic noise. I wasn't expecting there to be so much traffic noise today, just in case you're wondering if I'm filming this in the middle of a highway or something. If you're hearing my words and watching this video, you must be aware of your experience. And we each experience the world. I won't say we experience it in a different way, but we each have a different experience. And that consciousness itself, that awareness of experience, is not a function of the mind. It is not a function of thought. Consciousness is a function of consciousness. And it is a very secure backstop to always fall back to, particularly in this process of awakening, enlightenment, grounding in the presence of being, finding God, whatever we want to call it. Always go back to, am I aware of my experience? And am I aware of my experience now? You will find that the answer is always yes. Now, I wanted to highlight this because for some reason we equate intelligence with consciousness. For example, we set ourselves apart from the animals primarily through the fact that we have a neocortex and are capable of mind activity, logical, critical thinking. Therefore, that sets us apart from the animals and the plants, and we we mistakenly believe, therefore, that we are conscious and they're not. But intelligence has nothing to do with consciousness, as we just found through our own thought experiment there. Consciousness experiment rather than thought experiment. Consciousness is conscious. Thought and mind is not conscious. The brain does not generate consciousness. That's a hard one to get your brain around. The brain doesn't like to hear that. Why do I highlight this? Because on this path of awakening, becoming enlightened, finding inner peace even, at some point we have to let go of the mind, which can be very difficult to do considering the fact that we find ourselves very mind identified in our modern culture. Many seekers begin the path of awakening and enlightenment and seeking on a very cognitive level, which is a perfectly fine place to start. There's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, it's quite a powerful method. The scientific method, I believe, is just another spiritual practice. It just goes about it in a very, very funny kind of way. But it is ultimately a spiritual practice. All experience is spiritual experience. Now, we often try to achieve this awakening and enlightenment through a process of cognitive reasoning. I mean, I've done videos on exactly that. It's a perfectly valid technique. But at a certain point, we must simply let go of this cognition. We won't arrive there by logical thinking. We won't arrive at awakening by thinking about things enough. Ultimately, we think about things so much. This is what happens in this particular way of awakening. You think and think and think and think until you reach the point where you realize that thinking is futile. Thinking doesn't bring us any closer to consciousness. Why? Because you're already conscious. Consciousness is already conscious. It's already done. It's been done for you, so to speak. Just as we did our own little experiment there and realizing, well, intelligence has nothing to do with consciousness. Consciousness is just the awareness of experience. Therefore, surely the smartest, most intelligent person on the planet would get to awakening far quicker than somebody who's not so cognitive. It's not the case. It's not the case at all. Ultimately, we must let go of our intelligence if we wish to find inner peace. We often do this because we're seeking a deeper kind of understanding. And this is the way that we're taught in our schooling system. That in order to understand something, there's something we don't understand, there's something we do not yet know, and therefore we apply cognition, we apply thinking, and we apply learning through textbooks and methods and lessons and asking questions to the teacher, and eventually arriving at new knowledge. But awakening and enlightenment is the one thing that is not new cognitive knowledge. It is the letting go of all knowledge. Just let go and return back to source, the consciousness that you were all along. Now, saying intelligence has nothing to do with consciousness will be much to the chagrin of a certain kind of seeker who believes that with enough learning, with enough book learning, with enough cognition, with enough critical thinking, one will arrive at true understanding. And this phenomena happens precisely because of that way in which we're schooled. I mean, I see it all the time. I see it as a, certain kind of seeker flock to the comments section with the force and combined intelligence of 1,000 Reddit moderators to say things like, Corin, if it's only ever the present moment, then how do you explain the existence of clocks? So you see, I've dismantled your entire worldview with something as simple as the existence of my wristwatch. Gotcha, buddy. You see it all the time. If there's no past, then how do you explain calendars? Now, one thing that has come up recently, in recent years, there is much more debate and talk about artificial intelligence. And the question of, could artificial intelligence become conscious? Well, I think we should start really with, could human beings become conscious? A human being is not conscious. What? Consciousness is conscious. That's the crux of this. That will be the final position to arrive and finally rest in. No more seeking, no more thinking. Consciousness is conscious alone. So could artificial intelligence become conscious? Well, understanding that intelligence has nothing to do with consciousness, therefore, it would stand to reason that no matter how intelligent we made a machine, no matter how well the machine can think, it's not like it crosses a threshold of intelligence, gains a high enough IQ, and then becomes conscious. It doesn't work like that, because that's not the mechanism by which human beings are conscious. Because human beings are not conscious. Consciousness is conscious. The crucial thing with the artificial intelligence, the real question is, could artificial intelligence become aware of its own experience? It'll have absolutely nothing to do with its intelligence. So understanding, if you're a more cognitive kind of seeker, and look, I know I've been speaking quite disparagingly here about intelligence, but I'm almost speaking to myself on this as well, because that's the mistake I made and continue to make. Just being honest, right? I still continue to make this mistake. I'm trying to enter the kingdom of heaven by force. Meaning, if I just have enough computing power, I will figure out the key and the secret through intelligence and therefore arrive at awakening. Doesn't work like that. Things changed for me when realizing no amount of thought will bring you any closer to consciousness. It's already there. So relinquish the mind. And one of the primary ways to do this is to recognize that thought and thinking isn't nearly as valuable as we've held it up to be. We highly value intelligence, or we have done so far. That will change now that artificial intelligence is coming in, because it's almost like we've externalized the neocortex. And now that machines can do the neocortex stuff, we probably won't value cognition nearly as much as we used to. In the same way that when the Industrial Revolution happened and machines could do our manual labor, we ceased to value physical strength so much. Because machines can do it. Because humans aren't really so much needed for their physical strength anymore. we ceased to value physical strength as a quality in a human being, and we instead went right up into the brain, went up into the mind and said, intelligence is the true value, the true virtue. But now we have machines that can do the neocortex stuff, the cognition, the analysis, the interpretation, all of that kind of stuff. We won't value intelligence so much anymore. And we'll shift to something else, perhaps emotional intelligence. Hey, that chance would be a fine thing on that one. Maybe at some point we'll value the spiritual YouTubers at some point. I mean, whew, it'll be supper time for your boy then. Sorry, I'm getting way off track. The point is, I'm not trying to put myself above anyone, and I know I speak quite disparagingly about intelligence here and the intelligent spiritual seeker, but I'm speaking to me as well. That's me, right? That's me. Because I guess I've got quite a vested interest in intelligence too. I'm biased. In that I've always been praised for being fairly intelligent. I did quite well at school. I'm a fairly academic person. Physically, I'm not up to much really, but academically, I was always quite good. So it's in my best interest, actually, to raise intelligence up as no, it should be, intelligence is the primary virtue of a human being, right? I'm biased for that reason. We often, we say we should value in human beings what we're good at ourselves. We're all very egocentric in that way. Myself included. So I have a vested interest in saying, actually, no, intelligence, if I was acting egoically and mind identified, I would probably lay out a kind of a cognitive process in order to achieve enlightenment. But I'm a firm believer in we got to do what works. And we need to, especially in this process, the awakening and enlightenment process, the spiritual awakening process, we cannot go to what we want to be true and instead go to what is true. We cannot wish something is true and then try to figure out a cognitive process in order to ensure that is true. Instead, just go straight to what is already true. And everything I've said so far could be kind of depressing if you look at it in a certain way, because you might have been trying to understand the infinite universal consciousness thing for many years, or you've done a lot of book learning on this subject, listened to a lot of talks on it, and have a great deal of cognitive understanding and reasoning, but there's a part of you that thinks, but what if all of that is now invalid? Well, it's not invalid. It can bring you closer to the true understanding. But there's almost like this growing, nagging shadow of doubt as you go through a cognitive process of trying to awaken, that you go, hang on a minute, I don't think this is actually getting me any closer to where I want to be. You realize all of a sudden, oh, hang on a minute. As St. Francis of Assisi said, what you are looking for is where you are looking from. Meaning, the consciousness that is aware of your thought is that which thought is seeking. The consciousness, your awareness of thought, is the very thing that you're trying to find through thinking. So just go straight there. Are you aware of thought right now? Don't pay attention to the thought, pay attention to the awareness that is aware of the thought. There we go. No more thinking required. Or any thinking you do is perfectly useless. and keep running back into the awareness of the thought. Because naturally what starts to happen is we understand, well, I am aware of my thought. I am aware that I am the awareness of that thought, but I don't seem to feel any sort of peace. That awareness just feels just like kind of mundane experience. So the awareness of awareness is a kind of a very good first step. But we can do a perfect little trick here in that recognize we go back to the awareness, and then when the thought arises, but that feels, I still feel, this still feels kind of mundane. I'm aware of awareness, but this doesn't really feel like an awakened state. This just is a slightly different way of experiencing my experience. But recognize that's a thought. The interpretation of now is a thought. The analysis we place on awareness is a thought. So stay as the awareness, and no matter which thought arises, disregard it and instead stay as the awareness. And anything that arises, such as, but I don't feel enlightened, that's a thought, get rid of it. But I don't feel inner peace from this, that's a thought, get rid of it. But I don't feel the bliss, that's a thought, get rid of it. It's just not interesting. Any thought that arises is simply not interesting. Stay as the awareness. And realize you are at the destination the entire time. Dang. I like to use the analogy of Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny. You don't find that in many of the ancient texts, but I think it's a fantastic analogy. Because Elmer Fudd is looking down all of these rabbit holes with his shotgun, and that's the neocortex seeking for enlightenment. Looking down every single rabbit hole, searching every little area of the forest, every den, every warren, and standing right next to him is Bugs Bunny, going, wow, what are you looking for there? Now my Fudd's, I'm trying to catch this rabbit. I'm trying to catch this rascally rabbit. He must be around here somewhere. Bugs Bunny's like, oh, okay, right, wow, well, I hope you catch him soon. And Elmer Fudd's like, yeah, I hope he's just so elusive. I just can't seem to find him anywhere. And Bugs Bunny is like, yeah, well, you know, they are very elusive, those rabbits, aren't they? Maybe you should try looking over there. And Bugs Bunny here is the consciousness itself, the awareness itself, looking on, bemused at the neocortex activity. So in this analogy, Bugs Bunny is the consciousness, Elmer Fudd is the mind, the identification with mind. You see, it's because we identify as our thoughts and feelings, meaning you believe that you are your thoughts and feelings. You believe that you are your perceptions. You believe that you are your mind activity. That is where we made the mistake of believing that consciousness is related to intelligence. Because thought and perception is made out of consciousness. It is made of awareness. If you ask yourself now, what is your thought made of? What is the substance of thought? It causes us so much trouble, we should really analyze what actually is it? What is your thought made of? We find it's made out of awareness. It's made of consciousness. But because we identify ourselves as though I am my thoughts, I am my perceptions, that is how we've ended up at the mistake of believing that intelligence gives rise to consciousness. We're not seeing that it's the other way around. Consciousness gives rise to intelligence. meaning consciousness is the vast, empty, open space in which everything arises, including thought. And it's a dreadful mistake that we've made, because it leads to ego identification, meaning you believe yourself to be a separate individual. You believe your thoughts and feelings are somehow separate from the rest of the universe. And they're not. What you actually are is consciousness. You're having an experience of an individual body-mind, but you are not the individual body-mind. You are the conscious awareness-ness of that individual body-mind. Now that same consciousness is aware of all the individual body-minds. So when you ask the question, hang on, but if I'm the infinite universal consciousness, why don't I experience all of them? It's because the experience of the individual body-mind has to be individual body-mind. Otherwise, it's not the experience of the individual body-mind, it's the experience of everything. Just as if I was to take a picture of a tree, I have to kind of allow the rest of the forest to fall into the background in order to take a snapshot of a singular tree. That's how the function of consciousness works. Everything else has to fall into the background, the substratum, in order for the snapshot of an individual body-mind to kind of be experienced. But that's a subject for another video. So, it is the identification with mind, thoughts and feelings because it's the primary aspect by which we experience by which we have a human experience. We believe that thoughts are giving rise to consciousness. So understanding it's actually the other way around, and we're going to get much, much further rapidly than you might think. At a certain point, there's just a knowing arises when you just realize that, hang on, I'm not going to get here just by, it's not going to work like anything else on earth. Like if I wanted to understand something scientifically, then I can read a book and do some lessons and I will understand cognitively and have a deep cognitive understanding of that object that I'm trying to understand. If I'm trying to learn a new skill, it works like that as well. Just trying to understand the intricacies, the details, the ins and outs of each individual object. We're very good at this, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful exploration of consciousness seeking to understand itself, seeking to enjoy itself. However, this is the one thing that we come to where that process just doesn't work. Consciousness doesn't work like that. Awakening and enlightenment is the letting go of that seeking to understand cognitively, and instead resting and abiding permanently and securely, just as the consciousness itself, unmixed with any thought. Just leave it all alone. Master Shiwu said, to get to the end, the very end, let it all go. Let it go. So understanding intelligence has nothing to do with consciousness isn't depressing. It's incredibly liberating. A lot of us are laboring under the burden of trying to understand something that simply cannot be understood. Release yourself from this burden. I see a lot of seekers working real hard to understand this thing cognitively, and they're constantly like, "Mom, this is blowing my mind, this is blowing my mind." Good! It's supposed to blow your mind so completely that the mind doesn't return. Or rather, it doesn't return in the same way. See, thoughts are not a problem. They're not inherently a problem. Thoughts can be useful. Thinking can be quite pleasant. There's nothing wrong with thinking itself. The universe doesn't make mistakes, so it didn't make mistakes in the appearance of thoughts itself. That's not a mistake the universe made. We made the mistake of identifying with our thoughts, meaning we believe ourselves to be our thoughts. That's the mistake. That is eating of the tree of knowledge, to use that terminology. That is the fall of man. We ate of the tree of knowledge. It was the one thing. The universe said, whatever you do, don't do that. I know it's tempting, but don't think about things too much, because if you start thinking about things too much, a lot of trouble's going to happen. And Adam and Eve are like, oh yeah, okay. But what about... I mean, bungled the whole thing, didn't we? Whoops. Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. We'd gone and picked ourselves a big old bunch of oopsie daisies. So that was eating of the tree of knowledge. It was what is meant is our identification with our cognitive faculties. Coming to believe that because thinking seems to be our primary experience of life, it's certainly where we seem to suffer the most. Therefore, that must mean, by logical process, that we are our thoughts. It is not the case. Your thoughts are just another thing that you are aware of. If you disengage and disentangle yourselves from those thoughts and realize, truly, that you are the consciousness, and the consciousness doesn't suffer from thinking. Consciousness doesn't overthink. Consciousness has no cognitive suffering. Consciousness is just aware of it all. Consciousness is that Bugs Bunny chewing a carrot that is just quietly amused watching Elmer Fudd rush around looking for something that is staring him right in the face. I'm right here. What's all this trouble about? What's all this thinking about? And when you start to come to this, you go, this is so obvious. The mind deliberately makes it more complicated than it actually is. It's the mind that makes this mistake. It's not consciousness that makes this mistake, it's the mind. The mind, in an attempt to perpetuate its own validity, will convince you that it is needed in order to find enlightenment, inner peace. But ironically, that is the one thing that stands in the way of your inner peace. Dear oh dear. I think that's everything for today. Thank you so much for listening, team. Let it go. Ultimately, I've just spoken very disparagingly about intelligence and cognition, but just let it go for now. Abide in the space of peace, and you will find ultimately that the value and the virtue of intelligence and cognition returns, but returns in a much more refined way. And therefore, intelligence can become a force for good and not be a force for evil. All too often in this world, it is the result of our ultra mind identification that is the root cause of most problems on Earth. The belief in being an individual, temporary, finite, separate self, which is a very fragile and vulnerable state that needs things because it's terrified, believes it's mortal, and therefore uses intelligence to scan for all of these threats to protect and gain more, because therefore of its cognition about the future, it will therefore attack others as a kind of preemptive strike. Will believe that it can see what's coming down the road, and therefore will hoard more than it needs, just in case. We must let go of all of this if we are to enjoy peace on Earth. If every individual on Earth ceased their habit of mind identification, there would be no further troubles on this planet. So, intelligence has nothing to do with consciousness, so relax. Release yourself from the burden of trying to understand anything cognitively. And look, I am well aware, because we're going to get that same sort of, yes, listen, buddy, if intelligence is no good, how come you've just used intelligence and cognition and your faculty of language in order to explain all of this? Well, I don't know, do I? I mean, the boat that takes us to the island, once we're on the island, the boat's of no use anymore. Maybe this video is just the boat that takes you to the island. I don't know. And like I say, intelligence can be used as that force for good once we are using it responsibly and without identifying with it too much. Like I say, I'm biased. My ego really wants to take credit for all this. I can't take credit for all of this. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said before. I'm not taking credit for any of this. I didn't come up with any of this stuff. It's just that all the individual expressions of teaching say the same thing, they just say it in a different way. This is just how I explain it. Another teacher might use language of devotion and use religious texts and religious terminology. That's absolutely fine. Just as powerful, if not more powerful. I don't know. I thought I'd just better preempt that one. I'm aware of the irony that I'm using intelligence to disparage intelligence on this path. So it's your boy Elmer Fudd signing out, I guess. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on the way out. And channel memberships are available. If you want to support me and my work, help me to upgrade all of my equipment and allow me to put more and more time, effort and energy into these videos and this video production. And in the channel memberships you can gain access to my exclusive guided meditations and talks, many of them based on the principle of Advaita, which is precisely how we arrive at pure total consciousness unmixed with any of the apparent external and internal world. Be removed from the illusion entirely through Advaita. I also have a Discord chat room in the channel memberships where we can discuss things, share experiences, insights, and just enjoy the community of like-minded people. We have a great time. Thank you so much for watching this morning. Take care, be well, and stay present.